Welcome everyone to the February Focus Series. If it is your first time joining today, it's great to have you here with us. In this monthly focus series, we zoom in for 30 minutes on one conversation or one topic with the aim of enhancing or always enhancing clients' engagement. But we want to leave you with practical takeaways that you can incorporate into your client engagement process. And today's topic is designing better client takeaways. We do have the chat open, so please, if you have any questions, please post them in there. There's also the Q&A, and we are recording the session, and we'll share that with you afterwards. But what do we mean when we say designing better client takeaways? Now, if we think about, a lot of our focus webinars or a lot of our conversations are around how do we make those moments, those meetings when you're sitting in front of the clients more engaging. But today we're focusing on what do we do post that meeting? What do we leave the client with? And how can we be mindful of that in a way to make it just as engaging as the meeting itself? And if we think about designing client takeaways, there's lots of different things to think about. The first thing is that clients are on a journey with us. And there's lots of different steps in that journey. I know some of you, your client journeys may be 6 steps or 10 steps, but just broadly speaking, we know that there's the initial engagement where we're gathering information and, uncovering where the client is today. Then we move into a planning engagement where we're looking at different scenarios. At some point, there's implementation, and then we review. But if we think about what architects we want to design for those different steps in the process, then we need to think about how are they different and what do we want to do differently for each of those steps. So that's the first thing to think about. And then, of course, the way in which we share information. It used to be a printed report that we would share with the client, but now it might be printed, it might be, digitally shared. We might be sharing via the client portal. We're seeing, planners sharing information via video, in presentations, AI summaries that we share with clients. So there's just so many different mediums that we need to think about in how we share and create those for clients. And I was reminded again of this just 2 weeks ago, where we were working with a financial planner, and he was seeing a client for the very first time with Asset Map. And he shared the asset map with the clients. And as they were leaving the session, the client said, I just want to take a photo of my asset map before leaving. And I thought that was such a nice story to hear, but also that the client saw value in that and wanted to capture it immediately. The planner, of course, said, no, don't worry, I'll share it with you. I'll email it to you. But it's about thinking about in those moments, what do we leave the client with? Do we print an extra copy? Or what are the takeaways that we design? So going through thinking about all of those things, the aim is obviously that we want to share information in ways that is visual and engaging. So we create that same experience that we did in the session with the client. But we also want to deliver it in the format that the client prefers. And that could be multiple formats for different clients. But most importantly, that it's relevant to where they are in the journey. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. What are some of the things that we can do in that space? So if we think about it, I wanted to think about it in terms of steps. If you were to leave the session today and wanted to design or enhance the takeaways that you share with clients, what are some of the steps that you could follow in doing that? And I think the first step is taking a look at your process, your new client process, your review process, and that journey that you're taking clients through. And then think about for each step in that journey, what is the takeaway that you want to leave clients with, and how do we want to share that? So what are some of the things that we can share for each step? And then, of course, to automate it, to build in Asset Map things like stencils, report layouts, client portal permission sets that reflect each step in the journey and reflect what you want to share in each of those moments. Now, I'm sure there's lots of other ways you can share the information. I'm going to just focus on, in Asset Map, the reports, layouts, and the client portal permissions. But the idea is to always go through these 3 steps. What is our process? What are the key takeaways that we want to share with the client in each step in that process? And how do we streamline it and really automate that? So in order to do that today, I wanted to start with the new client journey. And I know we all have our own client journey that we take clients through. But for today, I want to just go through an example client journey of what that could look like and what are some of the features that we could incorporate in our client takeaways in each of these sections. So if we think for new clients, we're broadly speaking going through 3 steps. That initial engagement where we're uncovering where the client is today, what are the gaps, do we have all the information, what are their priorities? Then we're going into planning where we're looking at different scenarios, and then we're implementing. So what are some of the features that we could include in our client takeaways in each of those steps? And if we think about that initial engagement step, there we want to look at the map itself. We want to apply stencils to that. We want to have that view of where the client is today. And then initial priorities. Now, these may change as we go through the journey, but we want to start by identifying what the client's initial priorities are. And then signals is a great inclusion here. So we can show a client, this is where you are today. Here's some of the things we still need information on, or some of the gaps that we want to look at. These are the priorities that we're starting off with that we're going to refine over time. And this is what the model is saying is potentially, red items that we need to look in further. Then we move into the planning scenarios. Here, of course, we're going to be looking at target map scenarios. And this is where there could be multiple options. This is what happens if you save more. Here's a scenario if you spend less or work longer. So here we're going to be exploring all the different target map scenarios and then the drafts. Now, drafts is a great way of showing a client what ifs, and it's especially powerful if it's complex in nature in terms of what we're changing. So if you think about clients going through transitions, getting married or retiring, drafts is a great way of reflecting what those changes will look like. And in this part of the process, this is where we'll be going through drafts with the client to show them really tangibly the impact of changes that we can make. So this is a great one to include in that planning scenarios. And then, of course, once we agree on the way forward or the steps that we are taking now, then again, we're going to bring in target maps, but more the agreed scenarios. Instead of that list of 10, there might be 3. These are the ones we're moving forward on, as well as bringing in notes. Now, notes is also one that could fall into each one of these categories. It's just that it evolves as we go through the process with the client. So maybe the starting notes is about getting to know them and what's important to them. And as we move through the process, the notes evolve as the plan evolves. Similar with priorities. But this is just to give you some idea of how you could plot out what is my process, what are the things that I'm covering in each of these steps, and how do I bring that in to the takeaways that I share with clients post those engagements. So that's the new client process. Then let's talk a little bit about reviews. Now, we've shown this 2 by 2 before at a previous webinar, but the idea around this is to think about review in terms of what are the different conversations we could have. And if we review a client after a year or after 6 months, there could be changes in the client's life. There could have been changes in the products that we implemented for the clients. Or there might be no changes in the client's life or in any of the products. Then what is the conversation we have at review? Just to give you an example of what could fall into each of these quadrants, if we're engaging with the client after a year and there's been a marriage or a retirement or divorce, then the planning that we do is going to reflect that. So the process we take the client through is going to be very similar to that new client process where we start again by understanding where are you now? What changes do we need to incorporate, and how does that impact your plan? Similarly, if there's changes on the product side, then we're also going to be looking at the impact of those changes on the client's plan. But if we move across to the right-hand side and we think about, it's time for review, we sit down with the clients and there's been no change in the client's life, no change in the product. So the plan is on track and it's still achieving what they needed to achieve. This is a great opportunity to really deepen that discussion with the clients and bring in new topics that we can raise and incorporate into that review process. What I've seen works really well in practice is having a theme for the year. Perhaps that's for every client this year, we're going to work through beneficiaries with them, understand, is it reflecting their wishes? Is everyone on the same page with who gets what in the event of death? And just having that conversation with every client. Or the theme could be reviewing the will. This year with every client, we're going to work through when last was the will reviewed. Are there changes we need to make? So this is a great place to bring that in, but it's also about reconnecting with the plan, establishing, a deeper shared understanding with the client around what the plan is, what everything they have is doing for them, and how it relates to their goals. And some of the things that we can include in takeaways in these conversations, if we think of, there are changes, then we're going to follow that same new client process where we're going to go through the initial engagement, the planning scenarios, the agreed implementation. But where there are no changes, this is where we want to bring in things like reconnecting to the plan and bring in additional items to open up additional conversations. And that could be beneficiaries report, 6 L's or financial fire drills is a great example of that, of just having that conversation. We spoke about that, last month in the focus series when we talked through, how you could use that framework. But it's just a great way of making sure the client understands what is their plan in the event of each of these different life transitions that could happen. Other examples is relationship maps. We could bring that in to just understand the structure of the client. Is everyone on the same page? Are there changes we need to make? Or even legal documents, reconnecting to what is all the different legal documents the client has in place. Okay, but now we've gone through sort of an example of that, of mapping out your new client process, mapping out your review process, whether there's changes, whether there isn't changes, what themes we're bringing in. And we've identified, what are the key takeaways that we want to leave the client with in each of those, after each of those sessions. The next step is really bringing it into your process. How do we streamline the process? And we do that by building stencils, building report layouts that reflect that, building client portal permission sets, so that as we go through the process with the client, that we can reduce the amount of clicking we do by just selecting those templates, but also just create that standard streamlined approach. So I'm going to jump across into Asset Map now and just talk through how would you do that? How do you build those report layouts and client portal permissions? So stop, and then I'll share again. All right. All right, so now we've gone into the Jones family again, but I want to talk through the reporting tab now. So, and you can set these up in any household and they will apply to all households in Asset Map. So you set it up once in a particular household. But if you look down the panel on the left, I'm here on the reports tab, and here you can see I can generate a report, but also just to mention, I can look at history. So I can look at any reports that have been generated for a particular household over the course of that household being in Asset Map, and I can always download any past reports that we've got. From a generating report point of view, I think we all know that we can select and deselect which chapters or features we want to include in that report. And we can also move things around. So we can also just click and drag and move it to the order that we want it in. And you can see here under the Asset Map section, it's not just the default. I've got lots of different Asset Map layouts that I've created. And I'd really encourage you to do that on each household. Just think about, from a reporting point of view, the default will always be the spouses or partners, but I can also create layouts to show the company or the trust or different individuals, the children and different individuals together. So create those layouts up front, and then you can always just select them in the report. But you can also save different report layouts. So if you look at this drop down here, you'll see that I've created different report layouts for those different engagement meetings that we spoke about. So when I'm doing the initial engagement, post that, I can just come in here, click on initial engagement, and it's already in the order that I want, and the chapters are selected that I want to include in that report. So you can see how that can save us time, but also create that standard approach. I can still add to it and select and deselect to generate for a client, but it gives me that starting point of, I want to make sure that after that initial meeting, I'm looking at the Asset Map, I'm sharing the priorities, I'm sharing the signals. And then I can flip through to planning scenarios, where now I'm going to add in target maps, all of the scenarios. And then, once we get post that session and I move on to agreed implementation, then perhaps I'm only including some of the target map scenarios. So you can have these different changes and create these different layouts. Also created for review with no changes, where here I've included things like financial fire drills, like the beneficiary report, to remind myself to include that or open up that conversation. And then, of course, the with changes is pretty much very similar to that new individual approach. You'll notice that in all the layouts I've created, there's a couple of reports at the bottom that I didn't include in my default layout, things like balance sheets or policy summary. And the reason for that is I think those reports are really powerful in specific situations. You know, if a client has lots of individuals or there's lots of entities in the household, a balance sheet is a great report to include. You know, it gives a column for every individual and or business or trust and shows the family the net worth. So it shows assets less liabilities. One thing I will point out is you can select who you include in that balance sheet. So instead of just selecting everyone, some people may not have any financials, just select the ones that you want to include on that. It just looks neater when you generate that. Similarly with the policy summary, this is a great report to include if the client's got a lot of risk benefits, if you're really zoning in on that conversation. But again, I can select who I include in that report. Is it for everyone? Is it just for the primary clients and the spouse? Or who do I want to have that conversation with? I can also select which products I want to include on that policy summary. And I really like this because, for example, if I just want to have a conversation around the legal documents, I can select the individuals I want to look at and just select legal documents at the bottom instead of everything. So you can really select and deselect to zone in on the key takeaways so that's relevant for the client and it's not, 10 pages that they're not interested in going through. So those are some of the additional reports, as well as relationship maps. We brought out relationship maps just I think about a year ago now. The good news is I know a lot of you are waiting for the ability to include that visual in your reporting. At the moment, it's just the list view. That is coming. I'm thinking in the next, I don't want to make promises here, but the next couple of weeks. So it's on its way. So that's super exciting to be able to include that in our reporting as well. All right. But this is how we can create the different layouts, select what we want to include. And I really think it's a great step so that as you go through the process, you can see, well, which step are we on? What do I want to include? Making sure that it's relevant for the client, that it speaks to the stage of the process that they're in, and it's as engaging as the meeting itself. Also just want to shift quickly to an example report. I want to just talk about a few customization items that you can add on this report. Firstly, if you ever want to update your logo on the report, please just send that to us. We can update that on your profile if you want to update that. And then on the asset map page itself, you'll see there's a disclaimer at the bottom of the page that actually appears in-app as well as on the reports and on Client Portal. It's fully customizable, so you just send to us whatever you would like in your disclaimer and we'll put that onto your profile. We also have a sample one that we can share with you that you're welcome to use if you prefer. And then lastly, the very last page, the disclosure page is also fully customizable. So again, there's a sample one that's in there now, but whatever one you want, please just drop us a note and we can update that on your behalf. All right. Now let's take a look at how we can create the similar templates like we did in report layouts, but for Client Portal as well. So if I go across here to the Household tab, you'll see that there's a new Client Portal section here. Again, I can update this on any household. It will then apply to all households. But if I click on these three dots here, you'll see that I can go into Client Portal Preferences. And this is where you can create your own permission sets for the Client Portal. So you'll see here, I've mimicked what I did in the report layout, and I've created additional permission sets for that initial engagement, where I've selected certain items to be included, but not everything. I've also done the same for agreed implementation and reviews with no changes or with changes. To create these different Client Portal permission sets, you simply click on Create New, and from here, you will give it a name and select what you want to include in your Client Portal permission set. Okay. So that's how we do it here. And then if I go back to the client and I want to update that for a client, I can click on Client Portal here. It shows me everyone in the household, what permission set they currently have access to. It also shows me when they last logged in, so that can be quite useful, and the status of their client portal. From here, I can click on this little pencil and I can edit it. So I can change that permission set to say, all right, we now just post initial engagement. I want them to have that permission set. Or as I move into planning scenarios, I want them to have a different permission set. So that's how we can flip through it. And then I just want to mention one more thing on reports that I think I forgot to mention. If you want to create your own report layouts, you'll select the chapters you want to include and drag the order around until it's in the order that you like. And then here you select Save As. You can give that report layout a name, and you can select it to be your default report. So as you go into the Reports tab, that will then be your default. Okay. All right. I'm going to just jump back to the presentation to close off for the day. So if we think about those 3 steps again as a takeaway from today, just start by identifying your process. What are the steps? What are the things that you think is going to be exciting and engaging for the client in each of those steps that you can include in the takeaway? And then think about building that in to Asset Map as report layouts and in client portal permission sets, and how you're going to share that with clients throughout that journey. Thank you very much for your time today.